Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 145.
We made it.
And this is the celebration, I guess.
No, I thought we said 150.
Oh, we said 150?
150.
Jason he's
I'm
celebrating
too
every
anxious.
five.
He's
Anything
celebrating.
that's got a
I'm
five
too-
on it.
I can't-
Woo! Five!
I can't keep up with these round numbers y'all think we should celebrate. I never know.
There we go.
Nathan just tells me it's an exciting day
It's
for
an
a
exciting
certain
day.
number. You know,
You're
I don't
excited.
know. So,
It's
all
always
right.
exciting to make it.
It's
always
exciting.
exciting. So my name's Jason. This is Nathan. This is Ed. And
You
This
said
is
this.
in Ed.
You
In
said
Ed.
this is
This is
the
one
head
Ed.
Ed.
One of
we
our
have,
Eds.
We have some clones that we keep back in other places in case this one wears out.
Maybe that should be a new bit is what are better Eds we would rather have on the podcast than
okay.
Ed?
this is why we don't edit.
The
You get gems like
zombie
that.
Ed McMahon.
Yeah. The Ed that has to lay down in his chair.
All right.
That'd be-
of Mr. Ed the horse.
That would be Slug Ed.
Yes.
Are there any current Eds? I mean, every Ed I think of is dead.
Ed from, what's the Ed from The Office?
Oh, Ed Helms. Ed Helms. Yeah, I'd have. He'd come up here and rip-a-dit-to-do and sing a little song, and I'd be all about it. He have a banjo? That'd be cool. Let's do that. Ed Helms. All right, you guys get him for
I know
us.
how to play a chord on a banjo.
Okay, well, there you go.
Bring that in.
I don't
No,
own
basic-
I don't own a banjo.
There you go.
All right.
Ed Helms, I do think, is from Georgia.
Okay. So today we're going to answer a question sent to us by one of our fellow disciples, someone
Yep.
who's in our Men on Mission
Ah.
discipleship program.
Hey, Don.
Yep. And he has asked a question about a specific passage. I'm thinking we should probably read this. Do you think we should
Read
read
the passage?
this? Read the passage?
The whole passage?
No, I just read it. I just
that-
also read it the other day, so it's
All right.
probably
Well,
on
let me
my-
read the question while you
The
the
find
whole
it.
chapter's about it, though.
It kinda
Yeah, it is, but I think
Kinda
the
is.
specific part he's talking about, I know what he's saying.
Okay, well then I'll read the question. It says, after reading in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, recently in our discipleship, I got confused. I've always been of the idea that God wants us to meet the right person and procreate and get married. And I thought that's why he made man and woman, so that we could create his children on earth. It seems in this passage that being single so you can devote your time to God looks to be preferred. He states that it's fine if you're in a relationship, but if you're single, it's all the better. So, any insight? I think what he wants to know is, it sounds like Paul says in this chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, that you ought not to get married. Marriage is not necessarily a great thing, and so he's feeling like maybe there's a contradiction there. So let's talk about the contradiction. You wanna enlighten us on the passage there?
Yeah, so the specific part he's talking about is from 1 Corinthians 7, verse 8, where it says, "Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion."
So, does the chapter not begin, if I remember correctly, with him beginning with something like, so concerning marriage?
No, he starts by saying, I will say the header says concerning marriage.
Okay.
He starts by
He
talking
says
about...
what you wrote me about.
Yeah,
That's
he-
what
I had a
I
question.
was going to get to.
Yeah.
But he wasn't-
He's answering a question that we don't have the question.
That's
Well,
right.
all we know is, and he, at least in the NIV, because I was going to bring this up, I think it's the Bible Project, so I can't remember, but I remember listening to, and I think it was on a podcast episode, which makes me think it's them, where they talk about a lot of this stuff, and it's hard to tell because in the Greek they don't have like quotation marks,
Right.
so it's hard to know when he's quoting and when he's not. But like in the NIV, it starts with, it says, "Now for the matters," this is verse 1 of 1 Corinthians 7, "Now for the matters you wrote about," and then quotations, "it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman," end of quotations.
So
And
that's something they said.
supposedly.
Yeah,
Now, but once again, what I understand is in the Greek, that's not even fully clear. That's just what this translator goes, well, that must mean when Paul says this. Because some people, and this was the thing, that was a debate in the early churches. Is Paul actually saying it is good for a man not? But because of the rest of the thing in context, he makes clear, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm telling you that within marriage, that's, and he goes through a whole thing about that. And then at the end of that section of talking about how women, husbands and wives should handle sexuality in their marriage, he then says, now, and it seems like he's shifting gears to now to the unmarried, because that all applied only to sexual activity only applies to the married couples in the church.
Right.
To the unmarried, I tell you, it's good for you to stay unmarried as I do. Once again, though, and I believe on this podcast, there are some scholars, I think, that believe that may even be a quotation. That he's responding to something that some of them have said is what he's actually saying. It is good
But
to stay unmarried.
In that passage, even there, where he says that, does he not say, because of the current troubles or because of the current situation, I would say, I wish everybody were like me. Something like that,
Yeah,
somewhere
I'm a
in the
look.
part about not getting married. It's something about, there's something going on somewhere that is
Yeah.
indicated that's why he thinks this is a good idea now. But
Well,
then he
I
is,
think that's the part where down here where he talks about concerning change of status. He says each person should live as a believer in whatever situation.
oh yeah, don't
the
get
Lord has
remarried.
assigned.
Okay.
Don't get remarried.
Yeah.
And so my point in bringing this up was I do think even among a lot of scholarship, this is a rather confusing section because it's hard to know when is he quoting, when is he not quoting. But regardless,
Yeah.
I think that statement is in there. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think he's coming. I think it's important for us to lay down this first because I feel like because I've gotten this question a lot
Yeah.
over the years. When people read something in the Bible that takes marriage and brings it down in importance, people go, "Wait a minute,
Yes.
wait a minute." And I think the reason is because our society has elevated marriage
Yes.
to a place that I don't believe it was originally intended. Not to say marriage is not important. I always have to say that because people get all bent out of shape. But I think we need to acknowledge the waters we're swimming in.
Right.
Our
Especially
culture is
currently
that way.
right now, Christian culture
Christian
is
culture.
one of the few places
Mhm.
where marriage is still like because within our culture as a wide, there are more and more, and you'd sent me a research the other day. I can't remember what the statistic is, but among people under the age of 40, it's now a remarkably high percentage
For our country, it's remarkably high.
that are choosing to
Not get-
not be
get
married
married.
and maybe never get
and
married.
maybe never get married.
And the
That's exactly
Christian
right.
culture has this almost, and I'm not saying it's a intelligent, that's not the right word, conscious choice to respond and then re-elevate marriage. But within Christian culture, marriage, as you're saying, I
Well,
think
and the
is,
other thing in our culture is, let's be honest, some of the reason Christians push marriage so much is they can't imagine anybody wouldn't have sex.
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
That sex is like this overwhelming drive that no one can control.
Yes.
So apparently Jesus did, and maybe Paul too.
Yeah,
Uh,
obviously.
that no one can ever do this. You better get married, and you
Right.
should do it.
Yeah.
And Paul does say if you can't,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
should get married.
And unfortunately, that has led us to elevate married people above single people to the point where I
Right.
believe there are lots of, I know them, there are a lot of single people in the church these days that are being made to be almost second-class
They
citizens.
feel very uncomfortable.
They're left out. They're not integrated into the life of the church because they feel like, well, everybody here is coupled or families and all this, and here I am, and for whatever reason, maybe by their own choice, maybe not by their own choice, just because of the circumstances of their life, and I think it's done a disservice to them. It's an unloving thing we've done to them. So my point was originally that's why I think a lot of people read these passages
I do
and get a
too.
little bit of a shock to them because we have not held singleness in its proper place as
Right.
well. And I think what Paul's doing here is he in the context that he's preaching, because he's speaking here, he says, look, if you want to have the greatest impact in the kingdom, then you need to have all of your focus and attention on kingdom matters. For married people, this is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
And not wrong. It's just true. It's just the truth about life. When you have a spouse and some kids, your responsibility is you got to take care of that. You got to take care of your home and all of those things. And that then turns your attention, rightly so, away from certain kingdom matters that you might have more time for. So therefore, he's saying, if you remain single, you won't have that issue.
That's right.
And so he's elevating that as a really preferred state in that context. Doesn't mean he's saying marriage is bad, don't do it. He's just saying, look, if you want to see the kingdom values here and weighing those out, yes, staying single's got a lot of advantages here.
Well, I
Right.
think
That's
that's the point he's trying to get
Mm-hmm.
to, which is ultimately, because I wanted to bring back, I did find the exact passage you're talking about where he says, because of the present crisis, I think that it's good for a man to remain as he is, and he's talking to unmarried people or people who were married and they're widows or whatever.
Or their spouse who was unbelieving left
them, right? He says, are you pledged to a woman? Don't seek to be released, meaning if you're engaged, go ahead and get married. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. If you do marry, you've not sinned. If the virgin marries, she's not sinned. And what I mean is,
great.
I think what Paul is actually trying to get to is, I think, and this is the part that I remember in the Bible Project podcast about this was, Tim Mackey, who's the scholar there, says he thinks that this letter we don't have from the Corinthians is they're spending way too much time talking about sex and marriage, and there's a group that thinks you should be married, there's a group that thinks no one should be married, and Jesus is coming back in 6 weeks, so why would you do it anyway? Jesus ain't ever coming back. And I think what Paul is doing, which is what Paul's often doing, is going, get back. What are we arguing about this for? What matters is every decision you should make is, how is this a benefit to the kingdom? If I am so burning with lust and passion that I can't even focus on loving a sister in Christ because I have all of this, maybe then you should go ahead and get married, because you seem way too focused on sex for this to be a thing. But if that's not a problem for you, why are you spending all your time focused on romance? Do the part that matters, serve the widows, take care of the people in prison, do all the stuff that we know churches were doing at the time. And I think that's where he's getting to is, there's advantages to both. There's struggles with both. You need to examine that in light of the kingdom, not in light of what your culture says to do or what you personally just want to do.
Exactly.
I think that's where he's trying to get to. So there are going to be single Christians who go, this is not an issue for me right now. I'm not interested in anyone of the opposite sex. I'm not even thinking about dating. And I think what Paul would say, and I think what Jesus would say to you is, great. Just keep figuring out how to serve the kingdom. Keep figuring out in your church what you can do. And as Jason said, and I know in our culture, there's a lot of benefits to that. Some of the people I know who are most evangelistic minded of meeting people in our community and building relationships with them are people who are single, because they can go out every night and they can spend time hanging out with people and they can get to know wide groups of people. Whereas I, a married guy who loved doing that, it would be irresponsible for me to leave my wife and children every single night of the week to do something. But there's also a benefit in that, and that I'm raising my children to love Jesus. And it's not a right or wrong, as Jason's already said, and I think Paul clearly is saying.
Yeah, he says that clearly.
I mean, that's the end of the chapter. He's basically,
Yes.
he gives all these options. He talks to both groups of people, gives them, you can do this, or you can do this, or you can do this, you can do this, and in the end, it's not said.
This is also my favorite Paul
whichever
letter,
way you go.
because it's all over the place, where he starts by the thing, because there's a division in the church over people are saying, I'm a disciple of Paul. Some say they're Apollos. And he goes, thank God I didn't baptize anyone. And then he starts talking. He goes, oh, wait, I did baptize them. And then he keeps going and goes, oh, that's right. And I also baptized this guy.
them
They're like,
too.
Paul, just like write it down on a different sheet of
Well, it
paper.
just shows how, that's what I say to people all the time, the lengths of the books are determined by how much paper they had.
Yes.
That just shows you. He didn't have enough paper to start over.
Yes.
So I'm not correcting you. Don't scratch any of that out. I just keep talking. You just write down everything I say.
It's all fine.
It's like this podcast. We don't
Yeah,
edit.
that's right.
We
That's
don't
what I
edit.
mean. That's what
we
I
don't,
like about it.
We don't edit. We just keep talking.
Paul's like, guys, just look, I don't remember.
Don't listen
who
to
I
part of it. You
baptized.
got to listen to all of it.
And I particularly love when you read this chapter. There are some times when he goes, now, I don't have a command from the Lord, but this is what I think.
Exactly. That's right.
And then he'll stop and go, now this one is from God.
Okay, listen really clearly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he puts all of that in there.
Yeah,
well, and
that's
I
right.
think it also speaks to how messy this church in Corinth is as well, because we know there's all kinds of stuff. It feels like the church itself is in all this chaos, and Paul is trying to cut through to it. And the reason I bring that up is our world around marriage and sexuality and relationships is also in so much chaos. And I think as either one of you were talking about how marriage in the church either becomes this thing that is just, you got to get married so you can go have sex because it would be the worst thing if you can't, or we have these other just really wonky ideas about sex and how that applies to our we think God doesn't even care about it. And Paul, and I think it would be good for all of us and the person who asked us to get really focused on what's most important about my life is serving Jesus and the people he has placed in my life. And maybe that means there is somebody in my life, and the correct response at this point would be say, yeah, I should get married. And then maybe the response is, there ain't no one, and that I don't need to be spending my time going out and trying to figure that out. But the question needs to come to not what would be most sexually fulfilling to me or what would be most romantically fulfilling to me. It is, what does it take for me to serve Jesus and his kingdom? And what are things that are maybe holding me back, or, however that goes,
That's right.
that I may have to deal with. And so that would be my encouragement to you from these verses is, I think Paul and I think Jesus would say to you, seek first the kingdom, and all these other things are going to work themselves out if you keep that as your focus.
Everybody's pretty clear that the height of the Corinthian letter is 13.
Yeah,
13,
yeah.
where he finally gets to
The love.
It's love. Love is the height of all values. All this other stuff he's been. The Corinthian church, in some ways, is a lot like the church in the United States.
Yes.
It's not like I don't know firsthand that there are people that like one teacher over another teacher. And they don't mind saying, I don't want to come to church when this happens or when that happens. I'm really a disciple of this person. That's the whole first part of this thing.
Yep.
And it's been goofy in the church forever.
Yeah.
And he just that's bad. And then he talks about, this thing with marriage, and he talks about what's the role of men and women, and that's always been goofy. And then he finally gets to, it's love, y'all.
Yes.
We have to learn the height of everything. All these questions get answered if you would think in terms of, how do I really love people?
Yes.
And if marriage is your goal, let's just be honest, most of your gender-based relationships, if you're single, will be pointing you toward, is that a potential mate?
Yes.
If that's a potential mate, and if not, I'm not going to do much with this one because I don't want to cast off wrong feelings. I don't want to give them bad signals because the signals might be, but if that's not my goal, I'm not giving any signals.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That's right.
That goes back to another part, when Paul talks about, we ought to be men ought to be treating all women as sisters and
Yes.
vice versa as brothers. And if we just lived in that, the priority of marriage would be placed in its proper spot.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah, and the thought that everybody has to be sexually fulfilled every day of their life, that we have to make drugs so that men and women can continue to have sex until their heart would give out.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't the way our bodies were meant to work.
That's right. Well, and I do think it just goes, once again, I don't remember because we film so many at a time, but it goes back to the idea that life, and if we could get this in all of our heads, I'm talking about me. This is something, having the knowledge up here does me no good. There have to be practices that get this into my body. Life is not measured in my experience of it. And there may be, I bet there were probably times for Paul where he did at times go, man, I wish I had a partner, and I wish I knew what sex was like, and I wish this, and maybe there are points that was even a disappointment for him. But I know, and I know Christians who are choosing to be celibate and to live their life in this way, and those are opportunities to pray and to seek God in that moment, or to seek the intimacy of a friendship or another person, and to say, hey, this brother sister in Christ relationship, man, it deepens that, because I'm not looking for that in just a sexual act. It deepens those kind of things. In the same way that I, as a married man, when I find lust for someone who is not my spouse, also go to God in that moment. And I choose to allow that desire to try and redirect it to my spouse, and it deepens that relationship. And I think if I can get myself to a point that my life may not be as sexually fulfilling as my imagination can come up with. In fact, it will not be as fulfilling as my imagination can. And I will not have the best possible experience if what best is whatever I could imagine. But that's okay, because that's not what life's about. Life is about me living within God's kingdom, and that is a life that is truly life, which means every other life I could imagine is not real.
You got me to thinking, Nathan, about one of the original elders of this church was a guy that when I first met him was already in his 50s. I was barely 30. And he just was a special guy. He had made a lot of money. He had always wanted to be married. He'd never been married. He prayed for marriage. He struggled in the church because in our little core group, everybody was married. And when he thought he would have friends, I mean, I can just remember we hadn't even been friends for 6, 8 months, and the people he was closest to in the church were people they were married, they had kids, and when something would happen, he'd feel left out. And even at 50, he'd feel that pain. This was a guy his whole life in many different churches had devoted himself to. Okay, I'm good at business. I'm going to make as much money as I can. I'm going to give a lot of money to the kingdom. I'm going to help build churches. Our church wouldn't have gotten started. He's the one that early on when we were doing stuff, he would just say to me, Ed, some are going to do what we are asking. Some are not going to do it. So what? We're going to do what God calls us to. And he finally got married like the second or third year of our church. He found this lady, her husband had died. They began to hang out. They fell deeply, and I mean, they were a giggly teenager in love. And about, she, about a year in, during their courtship, she got this terrible disease. She was in a coma for months. He spent all the time at the hospital. We all prayed for him. We thought, oh my gosh, why would this happen? After he'd been praying forever, he's still devoting himself to the church the whole time. She comes out of this thing after a lot of prayer. She comes home. They get married in the hospital when she recovers.
Wow.
And 2 years into their marriage, he falls over dead of a heart attack. And everybody's like, why did he, he had a full life.
That's right.
It just hadn't been the kind of life that and I can't wait to get to heaven to see him again, because this church would not be this church if that dude hadn't been able to give the amount of time. And he'd just come in, he came and saw it. He lived in Fairburn, and he would drive down from Fairburn every day and just come and say, what do you need today, preacher? What can I do to help you today? Whatever he could do, he did.
Wow.
But he devoted himself to it, eventually got, the marriage that he wanted. Everybody thought it was short-sighted, but maybe it was the perfect one.
That's right.
Yeah,
Who
that's
knows?
right. Yeah.
Wow, great story. All right, well, that's it for today. Make sure you're continuing to send us those questions. We love getting those, and we appreciate them. Those of you who send those in, thanks for the questions that we've had. Thanks for the question we got this week. So the link is in the description for you to do that. Send it to us. Give us your name. Don't give us your name. We'll answer it either way. So, like I said, that's all I have right now, and so we're going to stop our taping for now.
Okay.
So next week,
Are you
We'll
saying
have-
taping because it's not like you put taping in quotations?
'Cause we don't
it's not
tape
on
anything.
It's on digital.
well, that's what I call
Yeah,
it.
It was just a.
So the next
Yeah.
time you
Good
see us,
quotations.
we'll all have different clothes on. It'll be a different day, and either the Braves will be it's still in the playoffs.
They'll either have won the World Series or lost in between
That's
somewhere.
right.
This particular game is not going well.
It is not. So
I
we'll
would
either
like
be
Charlie to
Saturday
take
or
a
morning.
screenshot of this and to send it to me so that next time we tape, I will wear the exact same clothes, just so that Jason can be wrong.
Perfect.
I'm that petty.
I'm gonna
Yes, you are.
Yes, he is.
Man.
All right. So y'all have a great one, and we'll see you next week.